Lone Boy runs away to a cave in the desert. What he discovers there changes his life. The arguments at home had become unbearable, and for the third time that week, Tommy Henderson heard his parents' shouts echoing through the simple three-room house. The 10-year-old boy couldn't stand seeing his mother crying hidden in the kitchen, or hearing his father slam his fist on the old wooden table that had belonged to his grandparents. When the fight reached the point where his name was mentioned amid accusations and tears, Tommy grabbed his faded school backpack, stuffed a water bottle and the 3 leftover breakfast rolls inside. The decision was made. He would leave and only return when everything was resolved, even if it took days. The midday sun punished the semi-arid region of inland Arizona mercilessly as the boy crossed the backyard, passing the broken fence his father had promised to fix for months. His rubber flip-flops raised small clouds of red dust with each step on the parched earth. He knew that land like the back of his hand, had played there since he learned to walk, but he had never ventured so far from home alone. The heat increased as he walked toward the rock formations he had always seen in the distance but never explored. His parents had always forbidden him from going there, saying it was dangerous and that a child had no business among those rocks. Now, far from the shouts and fights, Tommy felt a strange freedom mixed with fear. After an hour of walking, his small legs began to ache and thirst tightened. The water in the bottle had warmed under the scorching sun, but he drank it anyway, trying to save the little that remained. It was then that he spotted the dark opening among the orange rocks, a natural cave that seemed to offer the shelter he so desperately needed. He approached slowly, stepping carefully on the loose stones that rolled under his feet. The echo of his footsteps mixed with a strange sound coming from inside the cave. He stopped abruptly when he realized they were human voices, low and whispering, as if the people inside didn't want to be discovered. Tommy's heart raced. Who could be living in a cave in the middle of nowhere? His first instinct was to run back home, but childish curiosity and the scorching heat made him hesitate. The voices seemed calm, not threatening. One was an elderly woman's, another a man's, and there was also a younger voice, a young woman's. Gathering all the courage he could find, Tommy slipped through the cave entrance, staying close to the rocky wall. His eyes took a few seconds to adjust to the darkness, but he soon managed to make out the human figures inside the place. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. What Tommy saw left him completely confused. 3 people had turned that cave into an improvised home. There was a small camp stove on a flat rock, some pots arranged beside it, clothes hanging on a line tied between 2 rock ledges. Sleeping bags were arranged in a drier corner, and a small table made of crates held some personal items. The elderly woman with completely white hair tied in a bun was washing some dishes in an aluminum basin. She wore a simple but clean dress and flip-flops worn by time. The man, who appeared to be about 50, was fixing what looked like a sandal focused on his work. The young woman, much younger, perhaps in her 20s, was reading a book sitting on a sleeping bag. Suddenly, the elderly lady raised her head and looked directly at the spot where Tommy was hiding. Her eyes widened, and she let out a whisper that made the other 2 look as well. "Dorothy Henderson, did you see that too?" asked the man, slowly rising to his feet. "Yes, I did, Robert. And I know very well who that boy is," replied the woman, her voice choked with emotion. Tommy froze. How could that woman know who he was? He had never seen her in his life. He was sure of it. His instinct was to run from there, but his legs seemed to have turned to jelly. "You can come out from where you're hiding, boy. We won't hurt you at all," said the elderly woman, with a sweet voice that vaguely reminded him of someone. "Grandma, let me talk to him," said the young woman, standing up and walking slowly toward Tommy. "Hi, little one, what's your name?" Tommy," stammered the boy, still pressed against the cave wall. "Tommy Henderson, son of Linda and Anthony," completed the elderly woman, making the boy's eyes widen in shock. "How do you know my parents' names?" he asked, his voice trembling. The 3 adults exchanged meaningful glances. The man approached slowly, with his hands open to show he meant no harm. "Because we are your family, Tommy. I am your Uncle Robert, your father's brother. She is your great-grandmother Dorothy Henderson, mother of your late grandfather, and this pretty young lady here is your cousin Jennifer, my daughter." The revelation hit Tommy like a bolt of lightning. He had never heard of any of these relatives. His parents had always said they had no family, that it was just the three of them in the world. "That can't be true," said the boy, shaking his head. "My parents would have told me if I had family." The sadness that passed through the great-grandmother's eyes was so intense that even a child like Tommy could perceive it. She sat on a rock and motioned for him to come closer. "Come here, my grandson. There is a lot you need to know, but first tell me, why are you here alone? Do your parents know where you are?" Tommy looked at the three faces, watching him with genuine interest, and felt something he hadn't experienced at home in a long time. The feeling that someone really cared about him. "I ran away from home," he admitted, lowering his head. "My parents just fight. Today was worse than ever." "What were they fighting about?" asked Cousin Jennifer, sitting on the ground to be at eye level with him. "I don't really know. It has to do with money, with our house, with debts. My father said he'll have to sell our land because he can't pay the bills anymore. My mother cried a lot and said we have nowhere to go." The silence that followed was so heavy that Tommy could almost touch it. The three adults looked at each other again, and this time there was urgency in their eyes. "Robert, do you think he knows about the deed?" whispered the great-grandmother. "What deed?" asked Tommy, curious. "Sit here, boy," said Uncle Robert, pointing to a flat stone that served as a bench. "There are things about your family you need to know, things your parents might not know, or maybe didn't want to tell you." Tommy sat down, still wary but too curious to leave. Hunger was beginning to gnaw at him, and the smell of food coming from the camp stove made his stomach growl. "Are you hungry?" asked Jennifer, noticing the noise. "We have rice and beans here. Grandma makes the best food in the world." "I have bread in my backpack," said Tommy hesitantly. "Save your bread, son. Here you are, family, and family doesn't go hungry," said the great-grandmother, already getting up to prepare a plate. As she stirred the pot, Uncle Robert began to tell a story that left Tommy's mouth hanging open. "Many years ago, your father and I were very close. We played together, worked together on the farm with our father, your grandfather, Sebastian. But when he passed away and left the land, problems arose in the family." "What kind of problems?" asked Tommy, accepting the steaming plate his great-grandmother offered him. "Your father got angry because he thought I wasn't helping enough with the household expenses. I was young, I wanted to study, I wanted to see the world outside of here. We ended up having a huge fight and I left home, said I'd never come back." "And you never came back?" "I did come back, but years later. I brought little Jennifer, after her mother." Robert paused, looking at his daughter. "After it was just the two of us. But when I arrived, the house was sold, and no one could say where you had gone." The great-grandmother joined the conversation, bringing a mug of weak but hot coffee. "Your father was always proud, Tommy. When Robert left, he swore he didn't need anyone. When I tried to help with money for expenses, he threw me out of the house too. Said he didn't want charity from anyone." "But why are you living in a cave?" asked Tommy, still trying to process all the information. "Because we came back a few months ago, looking for you," explained Jennifer. "We found out where you lived, but we didn't know how to get close. Your father has a reputation as a difficult man in town. People said he didn't like visitors. So we decided to stay nearby, waiting for a chance to talk to him," continued Uncle Robert. "This cave is dry, safe, and close enough for us to observe your routine without bothering you." Tommy stopped eating, a suspicion growing in his mind. "You've been spying on me." "Not spying, son," said the great-grandmother, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Looking out for you. We knew sooner or later something like this would happen. The fights between your parents are getting worse and worse." "How do you know about my parents' fights?" Tommy was starting to get scared. "Because we've lived nearby for 3 months, boy. Sound travels far in this valley, especially at night when everything is quiet," explained Robert. The revelation that people had been watching his family without their knowledge made Tommy very uncomfortable. He stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee mug. "I'm leaving. You're strangers. My parents told me not to talk to strangers." "Tommy, wait," called Jennifer, but the boy was already running toward the cave entrance. The sun was lower when he emerged from the cool interior of the cave, but it was still very hot. Tommy ran as fast as he could, stumbling over rocks, desperate to get away from those people who claimed to be his family. But after about 20 minutes of running aimlessly, he stopped exhausted and looked around. He didn't recognize anything. Panic began to rise in his throat when he realized he was completely lost. The sun was setting, and he had no idea which direction to go to get home. He sat on a rock and began to cry. Hunger returned with a vengeance, and he remembered he had left his backpack with the bread in the cave. Thirst was also pressing, and the water bottle had been almost empty since noon. As darkness took over the arid landscape, Tommy realized he had no choice. He would have to go back to the cave, at least until the next day when he could try to find his way home in the sunlight. Using the stars as a guide, he managed to return to the rock formation after an hour of difficult walking. His feet hurt, he was thirsty and hungry, and the fear of sleeping out in the open was greater than his distrust of those people. When he reached the cave entrance, he heard low voices inside. He hesitated for a few moments before entering, but the cold of the Arizona night forced him to make a decision. "I knew you'd come back," said the great-grandmother, without even looking up from the embroidery she was doing by the light of an oil lamp. "Your backpack is over there, untouched. And I saved a plate of food for you." "How did you know I'd come back?" asked Tommy, surprised. "Because when I was a child, I also ran away from home several times, and I always came back hungry and afraid of the dark," she replied, smiling for the first time. Uncle Robert was lying in a sleeping bag, but he wasn't asleep. Jennifer was reading a book by the light of another oil lamp. The place felt cozier at night, with the yellow lights creating dancing shadows on the cave walls. "Sit here with me, Tommy," said the great-grandmother, patting the rock beside her. "I'm going to tell you some stories your mother should have told you." Tommy ate his dinner in silence as he listened to the old woman talk about the Henderson family, about the lands that belonged to his great-grandfather, about the hardships they faced during the droughts, about the children who scattered across the country in search of a better life. "Your mother, Linda, she's not from around here, right?" asked the great-grandmother. "No, she came from Miami when she married my father." "That's right. That's why she doesn't know our history. And your father. Well, your father preferred to forget the past when he decided to start over." "What history?" Tommy was getting curious again. The great-grandmother looked at Robert, who nodded his head, giving her permission to continue. "The land where you live today, Tommy, it wasn't bought by your father. It was inherited from your grandfather, Sebastian, who inherited it from his father, and so on." "But my father always said he bought our house." "Your house, yes. But the land it was built on, that's been a family inheritance for 4 generations. The revelation left Tommy confused. If the land was an inheritance, why was his father talking about selling? Why was he having money problems if he owned property? "But there's a problem," the great-grandmother continued, lowering her voice. "When your grandfather passed away, your father was very young and didn't understand anything about documents. He signed some papers that, well, that may not have been very honest." "What kind of papers?" "Papers that transferred part of the property to other people in exchange for loans your father took out to farm and raise cattle. The problem is that now these people are collecting on debts that might not even be legitimate." Tommy tried to understand, but it was too complicated for a 10-year-old. What he understood was that his family was in trouble because of things that happened before he was born. "Is that why you came back? To help my father?" he asked. "Partly, yes," said Uncle Robert, joining the conversation. "But mainly because you are our family, and family helps each other." "Then why don't you go talk to him? Why are you hiding here?" The 3 adults exchanged looks again, and Tommy realized there was something more to the story, something they weren't telling. "Because your father is too proud to accept help, son," said the great-grandmother finally. "And because when I tried to talk to him a few months ago, he threw me out of the house in front of the neighbors." "Grandma tried to find your parents when she heard you were having difficulties," explained Jennifer. "But Uncle Anthony yelled at her, said he didn't need anyone's charity and that if she showed up again, he'd call the—" She stopped, realizing it might be too much for a child. "Call who?" insisted Tommy. "The authorities," said Uncle Robert, sighing. Your father said he'd accuse Grandma of trespassing if she came back. The silence that followed was heavy. Tommy was beginning to understand why his parents never talked about family. It wasn't because they didn't have family. It was because his father had pushed everyone away out of pride. "But how did you know I'd end up running away from home?" he asked. "Because we've known your father since he was a boy," answered Robert, "and we know that when things get tough, he becomes impossible to live with. We imagined that at some point, you or your mother wouldn't be able to take it anymore. Your mother has tried to leave a few times," added the great-grandmother softly. "We saw her carrying a suitcase to the road, but she always comes back." "How did you see that?" "Because we have observation shifts, son. There's always someone watching in case you need urgent help." The idea of being watched still made Tommy uncomfortable, but he was beginning to realize that these people truly cared about his family, even after having been rejected. "And what are you going to do now?" he asked. "That depends on you," said Jennifer, stepping closer. "You can help us talk to your parents, or you can pretend you never saw us and go home tomorrow. But if I tell my parents about you, they'll be angry with me for talking to strangers." "Then you don't have to tell them about us yet," suggested the great-grandmother. "You can tell them about the papers, about the inheritance, about the people who are deceiving your father. But how will I explain how I know these things?" "You can say you heard it in town, that someone commented," said Uncle Robert. "The important thing is to plant the seed of doubt in his head. Make him question those contracts he signed." Tommy thought about the proposal as he settled into the extra sleeping bag Jennifer had laid out for him. It was the first time in months he felt safe and cared for, even though he was in a cave with people who, until that day, were complete strangers to him. "Grandma Dorothy," he said, trying out the name Jennifer used for the great-grandmother. "Yes, my grandson. You really don't want anything in return for helping my family?" "The only thing I want, Tommy, is to know my great-grandson and see my family together again before I leave this world." "Leave for where?" "Where all old folks go, son, but that's not for you to worry about now." Tommy slept better that night in the cave than he had at home in recent weeks. He didn't have to listen to arguments. He didn't need to hide under his pillow to muffle the shouts. He didn't feel the tense atmosphere that had settled permanently in his house. When he woke up the next morning, the smell of fresh coffee and toast filled the cave. The great-grandmother had woken up early and prepared a hearty breakfast with ingredients Tommy had no idea where they came from. "Good morning, sleepyhead," said Jennifer, who had been awake for some time. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than at home," admitted Tommy, stretching. "Your parents must be worried," said Uncle Robert. "You should go home soon." "I know, but I'm afraid of what they'll do to me for running away." "They'll be relieved to see you alive and well," said the great-grandmother. "Parents always are." After breakfast, Tommy said goodbye to his newly discovered relatives with a mix of sadness and anxiety. Sadness at leaving that welcoming environment, anxiety at facing his parents' reaction. "Remember what we talked about," said Jennifer, hugging the boy. "If you need anything, we are here. How will I find you again?" "You already know the way," said the great-grandmother. "And we aren't leaving here any time soon." The way back home seemed shorter in the daylight. Tommy recognized several landmarks he had missed in his desperate run the day before. When he spotted his simple three-room house in the distance, he saw movement in the yard and realized his parents were looking for him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. His mother was the first to see him. Linda Henderson let out a cry of relief and ran toward him, her rubber flip-flops kicking up dust in the dry ground. Anthony Henderson appeared right behind, his face a mix of relief and anger. "Tommy, good heavens, where were you?" shouted his mother, hugging him tightly. "We spent the whole night looking for you." "I ran away," said Tommy simply, unable to come up with a better lie. "Ran away where?" asked his father, stepping closer. "Do you know how you scared your mother?" "To the rocks over there." He pointed vaguely toward the rock formations. "I slept in a cave." "Alone?" His mother's voice was full of horror. "Anything could have happened to you. You could have been bitten by a snake, attacked by a mountain lion, gotten lost in the brush," added his father, anger rising in his voice. What was this idea of running away from home? Tommy looked at both parents and realized they had truly been worried. There were dark circles under his mother's eyes, indicating she hadn't slept, and his father seemed to have aged years in a single night. It was because of the fights, he said, deciding to be honest. You only yell at each other. I can't take it anymore. The couple exchanged a look, and Tommy saw shame in their eyes. Son, things are difficult right now, but that doesn't justify you running off like that, said Anthony in a softer tone. Difficult how? Asked Tommy, remembering his great-grandmother's instructions. They're adult problems. You don't need to worry, his mother replied quickly. But I heard you talking about selling our house. Is it true? Again, the parents exchanged a look. Tommy realized they didn't know how much he had overheard of their arguments. We might need to sell, yes, the father admitted finally. We have some debts and, well, the situation is complicated. What kind of debts? Tommy, you're too young to understand these things, said his mother. But I want to understand. This is my house too. Anthony sighed and sat on a rock in the yard. Linda approached and put a hand on her husband's shoulder. All right, you have a right to know, said the father. A few years ago I borrowed money to plant corn and raise some cattle. I promised to pay it back with the sale of the harvest and the animals. And you couldn't pay? The drought killed almost everything. The little that was left was barely enough for our own food. Now the men who lent me the money want me to pay no matter what. And if you can't pay, they can take our land as payment. Tommy felt his stomach tighten. It was exactly what his great-grandmother had explained the night before. Dad, but isn't this land ours? Didn't we inherit it from Grandpa? Yes, but... Anthony stopped, looking surprised at his son. How do you know about your grandfather? Tommy realized he had stepped into dangerous territory. He needed to be careful. Sometimes I hear you talking at night. And in town some people talk about our family. What people? His father's voice grew suspicious. At the bakery, the pharmacy. Sometimes I hear adults commenting about Grandpa Sebastian's land. The mention of his grandfather's name caused a strong reaction in his father. He stood up abruptly and began pacing back and forth. What are they saying? That maybe you signed some papers without fully understanding, that some people might have taken advantage of the situation. Who said that? Anthony's voice was becoming agitated. I don't know the names, Dad. I just heard bits of conversation. Linda approached her husband, worried about his reaction. Anthony, calm down. Maybe it's worth checking those documents after all. There's nothing to check, he exploded. I know perfectly well what I signed. But Dad, if people are talking, people talk too much in this town. Anthony turned to Tommy. And you shouldn't be listening to adult conversations. Anthony, stop, Linda intervened. The boy is just trying to help. Help how? Spreading rumors he heard on the street. The argument was heading in the same direction as always, and Tommy felt he had failed miserably in his mission to plant constructive doubts in his father's mind. I just wanted to understand why our family doesn't have anyone else, he said, changing his strategy. What do you mean? I see my friends from school with grandparents, uncles, cousins. We only have the three of us. Isn't there anyone from your family or Mom's who could help? The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Linda looked at her husband, waiting for him to answer. My family is all scattered across the country, said Anthony finally, and your mother's family lives very far away. But isn't there anyone nearby? There's no one that matters, replied his father, with a hardness in his voice that made Tommy realize it was better to stop there. During the following days, Tommy noticed his words had planted seeds in his parents' minds. Linda asked discreet questions about the documents Anthony had signed, and he, reluctantly, began to show her the papers. One night, Tommy woke to low voices in the kitchen. He crept to the bedroom door and managed to hear part of the conversation. Anthony, I don't understand anything about documents, but these interest rates seem very high, Linda was saying. It was what they offered at the time. I needed the money urgently. But 5% per month, is that even legal? Legal or not, it's what I signed. What if they're cheating you? Linda, I'm not stupid. I can read. I can do the math. I know you're not stupid, honey, but you said yourself you were desperate at the time. Desperate people sometimes make bad deals. Tommy heard the sound of papers being shuffled on the table. Look here, his mother continued. It says that if you don't pay on time, they can take the entire property. Our house is worth much more than the original debt. That's how it works, Linda. I don't think it is. I think we should look for someone who understands these things. Who? A lawyer? With what money? I don't know. There must be someone who can give an opinion for free. Tommy smiled in the darkness. His mother was starting to question the situation, exactly as his great-grandmother had predicted. Now he needed to find a way to put the family in touch with the relatives who could help. In the days that followed, Tommy returned to the cave twice, always making excuses to be away from home. He reported the conversations he had overheard and asked for advice on how to proceed. "Your mother seems like a sensible person," commented his great-grandmother. "Perhaps she is the key to resolving this situation. But how do I get my parents to meet you without them getting mad at me?" "Leave that to us," said Uncle Robert. "We have a plan." "What kind of plan?" "You'll see," said Jennifer, smiling mysteriously. 2 days later, Tommy was helping his mother hang clothes in the backyard when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He looked toward the small front gate and saw an elderly woman walking slowly along the dirt path leading to the house. It was great-grandmother Dorothy Henderson, but Tommy pretended to be surprised when he saw her. "Mum, there's a lady coming here," he said, pointing. Linda stopped hanging the clothes and looked in the indicated direction. The elderly woman was carrying a straw basket and walking with difficulty under the hot sun. "I wonder what she wants," murmured Linda, heading toward the gate. "Good afternoon," said the great-grandmother as she got closer. "Are you Anthony Henderson's wife?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Dorothy Henderson. I've come to bring you some fruit," she said, extending the basket. "I heard you've been going through some difficulties." Linda was visibly embarrassed. The gossip about the family's financial troubles was already circulating through the neighborhood. "That's very kind of you, ma'am, but we don't need charity," she replied, polite but firm. "It's not charity, my dear. It's neighborliness. I live near the rock formations, and I grow these little fruits in my yard. There's always more than I can eat by myself." "You live in the rock formations?" asked Linda, surprised. "I didn't know there were houses there." "There aren't any houses. I live in a cave, actually. It's cooler and drier than it seems." Tommy was watching the conversation, pretending to play in the yard, but listening to every word. "A cave?" Linda seemed worried. "But is that safe for someone your age?" "Oh, my dear, I've lived in worse places, and I'm not alone. I have my son and my granddaughter with me." "Your whole family lives in a cave?" "For now, yes. We're looking for a little place to rent in the area, but it's not easy to find something we can afford." Linda looked at the basket of fresh, well-tended fruits. There were mangoes, bananas, and some fruits she didn't recognize, but they looked delicious. "Why don't you at least accept a glass of water?" she offered. "The sun is very strong." "I accept, thank you." Tommy followed the two women to the shaded area of the yard, where there was a wooden bench under a tree. Linda brought fresh water and sat down to talk with the visitor. "You said you're looking for a place to rent. Where are you from?" "From this area, actually, but we've been traveling for a few years. My son works in carpentry, makes furniture, does repairs. My granddaughter studied and can help with paperwork. Those document things." Tommy saw his mother's eyes light up with interest at the word documents. "What kind of help with paperwork?" "Oh, she studied law. She's not a licensed lawyer, but she understands a lot about contracts, deeds, those complicated things that simple folks like us can't quite understand." "How interesting," said Linda, clearly thinking about the doubts she had about her husband's documents. "It's true. She's already helped several people here in the area who had similar problems, people who signed papers without really understanding, who were being cheated by loan sharks. You know how it is." "How do you mean, cheated?" "Oh, there are a lot of unscrupulous people out there, my dear. They take advantage of others' need to make dishonest deals, charge abusive interest, put in clauses they shouldn't, those things." Linda was clearly interested, but hesitant to continue the conversation. "Well, I really don't understand any of those things," she said cautiously. "If you ever need help, just come look for us at the cave. My granddaughter doesn't charge anything to take a look at the papers, just to see if everything is in order." "You are very kind." "Kindness, nothing. It's just that we know how hard it is when nobody properly explains what you're signing." At that moment, Anthony arrived from work in the field. He stopped abruptly when he saw the elderly woman talking to his wife in the yard. "Good afternoon," he said, but Tommy noticed tension in his voice. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Mrs. Dorothy Henderson. I was bringing some fruits for your family." Anthony looked at the basket, then at his wife, then back at the visitor. There was something in his look that Tommy couldn't decipher. "Thank you very much, but we don't need it," he said curtly. "Anthony!" Linda scolded. "Mrs. Dorothy was very kind. At least thank her properly." I thanked her. The great-grandmother stood up slowly, clearly noticing the tension that had settled. "Well, I think I'd better be going. Thank you very much for the water, Mrs. Linda. Don't mention it. Come back whenever you want. Count on it. And remember what we talked about regarding the papers. Anything, just call." Tommy saw his father stiffen when he heard the word papers. "What papers?" asked Anthony. "Nothing important," said Linda quickly. "Mrs. Dorothy was saying that her granddaughter knows about documents and can help people when they have questions." "What kind of questions?" "About contracts, loans, that sort of thing," answered the great-grandmother, looking directly into his eyes. The look Anthony returned was loaded with something it took Tommy a few seconds to recognize. It was fear. "We don't need any help with documents," said Anthony, with a hardness in his voice that made the great-grandmother take a step back. Of course. I was just offering in case you needed it." "We don't." The silence that followed was awkward. The great-grandmother politely said goodbye and walked away, but not before making a discreet signal to Tommy that only he noticed. As soon as she was out of sight, Anthony turned to his wife. "What was that? Why were you talking about our documents with a stranger?" "I didn't talk about our documents. She offered help. Help that nobody asked for. Anthony, she was just being kind, and maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea for someone to take a look at the contracts." "Linda?" His voice rose dangerously. "How many times do I have to say I don't want strangers meddling in our affairs? But if she can help, she can't help, nobody can help. The situation is what it is, and that's that." Tommy saw his mother retreat, her hopeful expression turning into resignation. It was always like this. Whenever Linda tried to suggest some solution, Anthony would cut her off sharply. "All right," she said softly. "I'm sorry." Dinner was tense that night. Anthony barely spoke, focused on his plate of beans and cornbread. Linda tried to start a conversation a few times, but gave up in the face of her husband's monosyllabic replies. After his parents went to sleep, Tommy kept thinking about his father's strange reaction upon seeing the great-grandmother. It had been more than simple distrust of a stranger. It had been almost recognition. The next morning, Tommy made up an excuse to go fetch a goat that had run off and hurried to the cave. "How did it go?" asked Jennifer as soon as she saw him. "My father got really strange when he saw Grandma. It seemed like he knew her from somewhere." The great-grandmother and Uncle Robert exchanged meaningful looks. "Did he recognize you, Grandma?" asked Jennifer. "I think so," replied the elderly woman thoughtfully. "I saw it in his eyes. He knows who I am." "Then why didn't he say anything?" asked Tommy. "Because your father is as stubborn as a mule," said Uncle Robert. "He'd rather die than admit he needs help, but he seemed scared too." "Scared of what?" "I don't know. When you talked about documents, he got really nervous." The great-grandmother stood up and began pacing back and forth in the cave, deep in thought. "Robert, do you remember that man who used to go around collecting debts in the area a few years back? Joshua Parker?" "I remember. Why?" "I have a feeling it might have something to do with Anthony's troubles." "Who is Joshua Parker?" asked Tommy. "A man who lent money to the ranchers in the area," explained Uncle Robert. "But he charged abusive interest and used deceptive contracts." "Do you think it was him my father borrowed from?" "It's possible," said the great-grandmother. "And if it is, that explains why he's so afraid of someone looking at the papers." "Why?" "Because Joshua's contracts were all illegal. If someone who knows the law takes a look, they'll see right away that your father was cheated." The revelation left Tommy both excited and worried. Excited because it could mean his family wouldn't lose the house. Worried because he didn't know how to convince his father to accept help. "It has to be your mother," said Jennifer. She seemed interested when Grandma talked about help with documents. But my father doesn't let her make any decisions about these things. Then we have to find a way for her to see the documents without him knowing, suggested Uncle Robert. How? Leave it to me, said the great-grandmother, with a smile that Tommy was learning to recognize as a sign that she had a plan. 3 days later, the great-grandmother appeared again at the Henderson family home. This time, she brought Jennifer along. "Good morning, Mrs. Linda," she said when Tommy's mother came to the door. "I brought my granddaughter to meet you." Linda looked at the young woman beside the elderly lady and smiled. Jennifer had a clean and polite appearance, despite the simple clothes. "Pleased to meet you," said Jennifer, extending her hand. "My grandmother won't stop talking about you." "What an exaggeration," Linda laughed. Come in. It's very sunny out there." The three of them sat in the small living room of the house. Tommy watched everything, pretending to play on the floor. "How are you managing living in a cave?" asked Linda, genuinely concerned. "Oh, we adapt," replied Jennifer. "It's really temporary. We'll find a little place to rent soon." "It must be difficult, especially for a young woman like you." "Actually, I like the adventure, and it's given me time to study. I'm preparing to take a civil service exam." "What kind of exam?" "For the county clerk's office. I need to be well prepared in civil law, documents, those kinds of things." Linda immediately became interested in the conversation. "You must know a lot about those things then." "A little, especially loan contracts, financing, property deeds." "How interesting." Jennifer seemed to notice the growing interest in Linda's voice. "Do you have any questions about a document? I can take a quick look if you'd like. Since I'm studying, it's good practice." "Well," Linda hesitated, looking toward the bedroom where Anthony was resting after lunch. "My husband has some loan papers that sometimes I find a bit strange." "Strange how?" "The interest seems very high, and there's some fine print I don't really understand." "Can I take a look?" offered Jennifer, "just to see if everything is normal." Linda visibly wrestled between curiosity and fear of her husband's reaction. "He doesn't like other people touching the documents," she said quietly. "She doesn't need to touch them," said the great-grandmother. "Just a quick look while he's resting." "I don't know." "Mom," interjected Tommy, who had grown tired of pretending he wasn't paying attention, "if the young lady can help, why not let her look?" "Tommy, this is adult business." "But if the documents are correct, there's no problem with someone looking," he insisted. "And if they're wrong, it's better to find out soon." The child's simple logic seemed to make sense to Linda. She looked again toward the bedroom, where the sound of Anthony's heavy breathing could be heard as he slept. "All right," she said finally, "but it has to be quick and quiet." Linda went to the bedroom and returned with a plastic folder full of documents. Jennifer carefully opened it and began examining the papers, her expression growing more and more serious. "My God," she whispered after a few minutes. "What is it?" asked Linda, alarmed. "These contracts are completely illegal," said Jennifer, keeping her voice low. "The interest is 3 times above what's permitted by law, and there are clauses here that no judge in the country would accept." "How so?" "Look here," Jennifer pointed to a paragraph. "This clause says that if your husband misses a payment, the debt automatically doubles. That's totally illegal." "And this here?" Linda pointed to another section that had always puzzled her. "This part says that if he doesn't pay, you lose not only the property but also all personal belongings, car, furniture, everything. That can't be right either." Linda was growing pale as she understood the scale of the problem. "So, my husband was tricked?" "Completely. Whoever made these contracts took advantage of your need to pull a scam." "But what can we do? He already signed everything." "You can annul all these contracts," said Jennifer animatedly. "A judge would cancel this right away. Your husband doesn't even owe the interest, let alone the exorbitant amount they're charging." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I've seen similar cases. Not only is the debt cancelled, but the creditor can also be sued for illegal practices." Tommy saw hope appear in his mother's eyes for the first time in months. "But how to do this without a lawyer? We don't have money to pay one." "There's a public defender's office, Mom," said Tommy. "At school, the teacher said people without money have the right to a free lawyer." It's true, confirmed Jennifer, and with documents that are so clearly illegal, it would be an easy and quick process. The problem is convincing my husband, said Linda, sighing. He has terrible pride. He doesn't like to admit he was fooled. But what if he loses the property out of pride? Asked the great-grandmother. I know, but you don't know him. Once he makes a decision, nothing changes his mind. Maybe if he knew he wouldn't lose his dignity, that he was actually the victim of a scam, suggested Jennifer. How so? If we explain that this happens to a lot of people, that it wasn't his stupidity but rather others' trickery, maybe he'll accept it better. Linda was considering the possibility when they heard heavy footsteps coming from the bedroom. Quickly, she put the documents back in the folder. Linda! Anthony's voice echoed through the house. Who's there? We have visitors, dear, she replied, trying to sound casual. Anthony appeared in the living room, still sleepy, and stopped upon seeing the great-grandmother and Jennifer. Good afternoon, he said, but his tone was not friendly. Good afternoon, Mr. Anthony, replied the great-grandmother. I brought my granddaughter to meet your family. Nice to meet you, said Jennifer, standing up to greet him. Yeah, said Anthony, not extending his hand. Jennifer was telling me about her studies, said Linda, trying to ease the tension. She knows a lot about documents, law, those kinds of things. Anthony's expression changed immediately. His eyes narrowed and he looked suspiciously at the folder Linda was still holding. What documents? Nothing specific, dear. She was just explaining about the types of contracts that exist. Oh, really? He approached his wife. And why was she explaining that? Just chatting, said Linda, but Tommy noticed nervousness in her voice. Linda, Anthony's voice became dangerously low. Did you show our papers to them? The silence that followed was answer enough. Fury began to spread across Anthony's face. I don't believe this, he exploded. You showed our private documents to two strangers. Anthony, calm down. Calm down. You exposed our private life to people you barely know and you want me to calm down? They were just trying to help. Help? Help with what? Spreading our problems around the neighborhood. Jennifer stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Mr. Anthony, it wasn't our intention to cause trouble. Your wife just wanted to understand the documents better and you, Anthony turned to her, who are you to be giving opinions about our life? I was just explaining that the contracts you signed are what? They're illegal, Dad, said Tommy, who couldn't stay quiet any longer. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone looked at the boy, who had stood up and was facing his father head-on. What did you say? Asked Anthony quietly. The documents you signed are illegal. Jennifer explained everything to Mom. The interest is way too high, and there are things written there that can't be. Tommy, began Linda, worried. It's true, Mum. She said any judge would cancel those contracts on the spot. Anthony looked at his son, at his wife, at the two visitors. His breathing was heavy, and his hands were shaking with anger. Get out, he said quietly. Anthony, Linda tried. Get out, he shouted, making everyone take a step back. Get out of my house now. The great-grandmother and Jennifer quickly headed for the door, but not before Jennifer said, Mr. Anthony, you have the right to know you were deceived. These documents, I don't want to know, he roared. Get out and don't come back here ever again. After they left, Anthony turned to his wife and son. His face was red with anger. How could you do this to me? Anthony, they were only trying to help, said Linda with tears in her eyes. Help? You humiliated me. You exposed our situation to strangers. But Dad, if they're right, it means we won't lose our house. Tommy, you don't understand anything. These people want to take advantage of our situation. Take advantage how? They didn't come here out of kindness. They came because they want something. What thing? I don't know, but nobody helps strangers for free. Linda approached her husband, trying to calm him down. Honey, what if they're right? What if you really were deceived? I wasn't deceived. I knew exactly what I was signing, but the interest rates were high because I was a high risk. Nobody was going to lend me money with low interest. Anthony, but if there's a possibility to fix this without losing our house. Linda, enough. I don't want to hear any more about this. But enough, he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. And you, he pointed at Tommy. I don't want to see you talking to these people anymore. If I find out you went to the rocks again, you'll see." Tommy felt tears welling up in his eyes, not from fear, but from frustration. His father was rejecting the only chance they had to solve the family's problems. "You'd rather lose our house than accept help?" he asked bravely. The question hit Anthony squarely. He stood still for a few seconds, looking at his son, then turned and left the house, slamming the door. Linda sat down heavily in a chair and began to cry softly. Tommy approached and put his hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, we have to do something." "What can we do, son? Your father won't change his mind. We can look for legal aid without him knowing." "Tommy, I can't do that. He's my husband." "But Mom, if they're right, we can save our house. And if they're wrong, what if this only makes things worse?" Tommy realized he needed more information before trying to convince his mother again. "Can I go talk to them again, just to understand better? Your father forbade you from going near them." "He doesn't need to know." Linda looked at her son for a long moment. "Tommy, this is very risky. If your father finds out..." "He won't find out. And if they can really help us?" "I don't know, son. I don't know anything anymore." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night after his parents went to sleep, Tommy kept thinking about the situation. His father was clearly afraid of something, but it wasn't just pride. There was something else, something he wasn't telling the family. The next morning, Anthony left early to work in the fields as always. Linda was washing clothes in the backyard when Tommy approached her. "Mum, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, son. Do you think my father is hiding something?" Linda stopped scrubbing the clothes and looked at the boy. "Why do you think that?" "Because he got very nervous when the ladies talked about the documents. It wasn't just anger, it was fear." "Fear of what?" "I don't know. But he reacted as if he knew there was something wrong with the papers." Linda went back to scrubbing the clothes, but Tommy noticed she was thinking. "Mom, I also thought his reaction was strange," she admitted. "Very strange." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know, Tommy. I really don't know." During the day, Tommy noticed his mother was more thoughtful than usual. She did the household chores automatically, clearly with her mind elsewhere. In the afternoon, after she was sure Anthony wouldn't be back early, Linda did something that surprised Tommy. She took the folder of documents and began examining them alone. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Trying to understand what that lady saw in the papers that got me so worried." "Can you understand anything?" "Not much, but look at this here." She pointed to a number on the contract. "This amount doesn't match what your father told me he had borrowed." "What do you mean?" "He told me he borrowed 5,000, but here it says 10,000. Tommy looked where his mother pointed. Indeed, the written amount was much larger than what his father had mentioned. "Maybe he didn't want to worry you by telling the real amount." "Maybe. Or maybe it's that..." She stopped, not wanting to complete the thought. "What, Mom?" "Nothing, son. They're just my guesses." But Tommy saw in his mother's eyes that she was beginning to suspect something. "Mom, we need to find out the truth. We can't live like this, not knowing what's really happening." "But how? Your father doesn't want us involved. You can go talk to the ladies, alone. He doesn't need to know." "Tommy, Mom, if there's a chance to save our home, we have to try." Linda stayed silent for a long moment, looking at the documents spread on the table. "Where did they say they live again?" "In the cave, up there in the rocks." "Do you know the way?" "Yes, I do." "Then tomorrow, when your father goes out to the field, we'll go there to talk to them. But this stays between the two of us, understand?" "I understand, Mom." The next morning, as soon as Anthony left for work, mother and son walked toward the rock formations. Linda carried the folder of documents, determined to discover the truth about the family's situation. The path seemed longer for Linda, who wasn't used to walking long distances under the sun. Tommy helped her whenever she needed to stop and rest. "It's here," he said when they reached the cave entrance. "Dorothy Henderson," called Linda. "It's Linda. May I come in?" "Come in, my dear," came the reply from inside the cave. The great-grandmother received the two with genuine joy. Jennifer was reading, and Uncle Robert was working on a piece of wood in a corner of the cave. "I'm so glad you came back," said the great-grandmother. "I was worried after what happened yesterday." "I'm sorry for my husband's reaction," said Linda. "He's been very stressed with this whole situation." "I imagine. Money problems make anyone nervous." "I brought the documents," said Linda, showing the folder. "I wanted you to look at them calmly and explain to me properly what's wrong." Jennifer approached and took the folder. For the next 20 minutes she examined each document carefully, making notes on a sheet of paper. "Linda," she said finally, "the situation is worse than I thought yesterday." "Worse how?" "These documents aren't just illegal. They're forged." The blood drained from Linda's face. "Forged how?" "Look here." Jennifer pointed to a signature. "Is this signature your husband's?" "Yes, it is." "And this one here?" "That one too." "Well then, your husband signed two different versions of the same contract. How is that possible?" "They had him sign a version up front, with lower amounts and easier terms. Then they made a second version with higher amounts and worse conditions, using the first signature as a model." Linda sat down heavily on a rock. The revelation was worse than anything she had imagined. "So my husband was the victim of a scam?" "Completely, and he probably doesn't even know it." "What do you mean he doesn't know?" "He must have kept the copy of the first version, the one he actually signed. The scammers kept the second version, the fake one, which is what they're using to collect payment." "But that's a crime. A very serious crime. Document forgery, fraud, loan sharking. Whoever did this could get many years in prison." Tommy watched his mother process the information. She was turning pale, but there was also a new determination in her eyes. "What can we do?" "First thing is to file a police report about the forgery," said Jennifer. "Then seek out the public defender's office to annul all the contracts and prosecute the criminals." "But how will I convince my husband to do this? He doesn't even know he was tricked." "Show him these papers," suggested the great-grandmother. "When he understands he was a victim of a crime, not bad management, maybe he'll agree to take action." "And what if he gets mad at me for coming here in secret?" "Linda," said Uncle Robert, speaking for the first time, "if you do nothing, you'll lose everything. House, land, everything. Is it worth risking an argument to save the family's property?" The logic was irrefutable. Linda looked at the documents, then at her son, then at the three adults who were willing to help her. "You're right. I'll show him all of this today." "Do you want me to come with you?" offered Jennifer. "To explain the technical part. I think it's better if I talk to him alone first. If he agrees to receive help, then you can talk." "As you wish. But don't take too long to resolve this. These criminals could disappear with the money and the documents if they realize you've discovered the scam." "What money?" "The money they've already stolen from other people in the area. I bet you weren't the only victims." The revelation that there were other families going through the same situation gave Linda the extra courage she needed. "All right, I'll talk to my husband today." "What if he doesn't believe it?" asked Tommy. "He'll believe it," said his mother, with a firmness in her voice the boy hadn't heard in months. "Because I won't let our family be destroyed because of his pride." The walk back home was made in silence. Linda was mentally rehearsing how to approach her husband with the discoveries. Tommy walked beside her, worried about the reaction his father would have. When they got home, Anthony hadn't returned from the field yet. Linda took the opportunity to organize all the documents on the kitchen table so the evidence would be clear when she showed it to him. "Mum, do you want me to stay here when you tell him?" "I think it's better not, son. This conversation will be difficult. I'd rather speak with him alone." "But what if he gets really angry? Your father has never laid a hand on me, Tommy. He yells, but he's not violent." "Okay, I'll be in the backyard, but if you need me, just call." When the sun began to set, Anthony arrived home sweaty and tired. He took a bath, had dinner, and was getting ready to rest when Linda said, "Anthony, I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it now, Linda?" "It's about the loan documents." His expression changed immediately. "Linda, I already said I don't want to talk about this anymore. But this time it's different. I discovered something very serious." "Discovered how?" Linda took a deep breath. There was no way to avoid telling the truth. "I went back to talk to that young woman who understands documents." "You did what?" His voice began to rise. "Just listen, Anthony. You were the victim of a scam. Linda, I forbid you to—" "They forged the documents," she interrupted, determined to make him listen. "You signed one version of the contract, but they are charging based on another, fake version." The accusation was so serious that Anthony stopped shouting. He looked at his wife, then at the papers scattered on the table. "What are you talking about? Sit here. I'll show you." Reluctantly, Anthony sat down. Linda began to explain, pointing out the differences between the documents, showing the suspicious signatures, comparing amounts. As she spoke, the expression on Anthony's face began to change. The initial anger gave way to confusion, then to worry, and finally to understanding. "Wait a minute," he said when Linda finished explaining. "You're saying I signed one contract, but they made another." "Exactly. But I have a copy of what I signed." "Where is it?" Anthony went to the bedroom and returned with a crumpled sheet. They compared it with the documents Linda had brought from the cave. The differences were glaring. "My God," Anthony whispered. "It's true, the amounts are completely different. Now, do you believe you were tricked?" Anthony was silent for a long moment, looking at the documents as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "How did they do this?" The young woman explained they used your signature from the first version as a model to forge the second. "And is that a crime? A serious crime? They could go to prison for several years." So I really don't owe all that money. Not only do you not owe it, but they can be sued for everything they've already put you through." Anthony put his hands over his face and was quiet for a few minutes. When he raised his head, there were tears in his eyes. "Linda, forgive me for shouting at you, for not listening." "Anthony, I knew something was wrong, but I thought it was my own stupidity that I'd gotten myself into a situation I couldn't fully understand." "Is that why you didn't want anyone to see the documents?" "Yes. I was ashamed of having been tricked." "But honey, you weren't tricked for being stupid. You were a victim of criminals. And now, what do we do?" The young woman said we have to file a police report and seek help from the public defender's office. "This young woman, does she really understand these things?" "It seems so, and she and her family want to help us." "What family?" Linda realized the time had come to tell the whole truth. "Anthony, there's something I haven't told you yet about who these people are." "What do you mean?" "They aren't strangers. They're our family." The silence that followed was absolute. Anthony looked at his wife as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean, our family? The elderly lady is your grandmother, Anthony. Your father's mother." "That's impossible. My grandmother died years ago." "She didn't die. She's alive, living in a cave there in the rocks, along with your brother Robert and his daughter." Anthony stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "Robert? My brother Robert is here?" "He is. For 3 months." "Why didn't they come talk to me?" "They did. Your grandmother came here a few months ago, but you threw her out." The memory slowly returned to Anthony. He remembered an elderly woman who had appeared at the house saying she was family, but he was so stressed at the time he didn't even pay proper attention to what she was saying. "Was that her? The woman who came here?" "That was your grandmother, Anthony, and you sent her away." Anthony sat on the floor, crushed by the weight of the revelations. Not only had he discovered he was the victim of a scam, but he had also rejected his own family when they tried to help. "Will they forgive me?" "Of course they will forgive you. They've been there waiting for months for a chance to talk to you properly. And can they really help us with this document situation?" "They can, and they want to. Jennifer, your niece, knows a lot about law. She can guide us through all the steps we have to take." Anthony was silent for a few more minutes, processing everything he had discovered. "Linda, will you help me fix this mess I made?" "Of course, love. That's why we're married." Tomorrow I'll go there and talk to them." "Are you sure?" "I am. I've already caused too many problems for our family because of my stupid pride." That night was the first time in months that the Henderson family dined in peace. There were no arguments, no tension in the air. For the first time, Anthony explained to Tommy exactly what the family's financial situation was and how they were going to solve it. So we're not going to lose our house? Asked the boy. Not only are we not going to lose it, but the criminals who tried to cheat us are going to pay for what they did. And am I going to meet my real family? Yes, you are, son. Tomorrow we'll all go together to talk to them. Tommy went to sleep that night feeling his adventure in the cave had been worth it. Not only had he found family he didn't know existed, but he had also saved his own family from ruin. The next morning, the three Hendersons walked together toward the rock formations. Anthony was visibly nervous, mentally rehearsing what he would say to the brother and grandmother he had rejected. "Relax, Dad," said Tommy. "They're really nice." "It's not that, son. It's that I behaved very badly toward them." "What matters is that you want to fix it now," said Linda. When they reached the cave entrance, Anthony stopped. His hands were trembling slightly. "Grandma Dorothy?" called Linda. "I've brought someone who wants to speak with you." The great-grandmother appeared at the cave entrance and stopped upon seeing Anthony. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "My grandson," she said softly. "Grandma," replied Anthony, his voice choked. The two embraced there at the cave entrance, crying without caring who saw them. Robert appeared behind his mother and stopped when he saw his brother. "Anthony." "Robert, forgive me, brother." "There's nothing to forgive, Anthony. I only have to thank you for giving me the chance to meet my nephew." The two brothers also embraced tightly, as if they wanted to recover all the lost years in a single gesture. Jennifer appeared last and was officially introduced as a cousin. Tommy was finally able to introduce his newly discovered family to his parents without fear or secrets. For the rest of the morning, they talked about everything that had happened during the years of separation. The great-grandmother told of the hardship she had faced. Robert explained why he had left home so young. Jennifer talked about her studies. But the most important part was when Anthony offered a formal apology for how he had treated the family. "I was so lost, so ashamed of the financial situation, that I thought anyone who came near wanted to take advantage," he explained. "It never crossed my mind that you had come back to help." "What matters is that we're all together again now," said the great-grandmother. "And we'll solve these problems as a family." "About the documents," said Jennifer. "I've already looked into it, and the public defender's office for the district can see us tomorrow." "Will you come with me?" asked Anthony. "Of course," replied Robert. "That's what family is for." That afternoon, the five of them went into town to file the police report. The police chief was impressed by the sophistication of the scam and said there were probably other victims in the area. "With these documents, you have a solid case," he said. "Not only will you get the debt annulled, but these criminals will be prosecuted." The next day at the public defender's office, the lawyer who assisted them confirmed what Jennifer had said. The contracts were completely void, and the family didn't owe a single cent. "Furthermore," said the lawyer, "you can sue for emotional distress. What they did to you was very serious." "We just want our peace back," said Anthony, "and for them not to do this to anyone else." "You'll get both." A week later, the scammers were arrested. The investigation revealed they had pulled the same scam on at least 15 families in the area. The recovered money was enough to compensate all the victims. The Henderson family not only regained their peace, but also gained an extra source of income. Robert set up a small woodworking shop in the backyard, making custom furniture to sell in town. Jennifer passed the notary public exam and got a steady job. The great-grandmother took over caring for the vegetable garden and the yard, producing greens that were sold at the local market. 3 months after the day Tommy ran away to the cave, the Henderson family property had been transformed. Where before there was only a simple house and arid land, now there was a small family business running. The cave became a weekend gathering spot. The neighborhood children would go there to listen to the stories the great-grandmother told, and the adults would meet to discuss community improvements. Tommy, who had started it all by running away from home to escape his parents' fights, now had a large and united family. Not only had the arguments at home stopped, but he had also discovered he had a grandmother, an uncle and a cousin who cared about him. "Grandma Dorothy," he said during one of those weekend meetings in the cave, "do you think things happened the right way?" "What do you mean, my grandson? I ran away from home at the right time. I found you all at the right time. We found out about the fake documents at the right time. It seems like everything was planned." The great-grandmother smiled and ran her hand through the boy's hair. "You know what I think, Tommy? I think sometimes, when people really need each other, fate finds a way to bring them together. Even when they're as stubborn as my dad? Especially when they're as stubborn as your dad," she laughed, "because stubborn people need extra help to find the right path. And now, are we all going to stay together forever? For as long as God allows, my grandson. For as long as God allows." A year later, the Henderson family had become an example in the region. The small family business was thriving, the property was productive, and most importantly, they had proven that it's possible to overcome any difficulty when a family truly unites. The lawsuit against the scammers resulted in convictions for fraud, document forgery, and forming a criminal organization. They were sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay compensation to all the victims. Anthony discovered that misplaced pride had almost destroyed his family, and he learned to accept help when needed. Linda gained the confidence to participate in the family's important decisions. Tommy learned that running away from problems solves nothing, but that sometimes a little courage can change everything. Great-grandmother Dorothy Henderson lived to see the family reunited and prosperous. Robert reconciled not only with his brother, but also with the difficult memories of the past. Jennifer found in the family she didn't know the support she needed to build her career. And the cave that once sheltered a family, separated by circumstances, became a symbol that blood ties, when watered with forgiveness and understanding, are stronger than any adversity. The story of Tommy Henderson, the boy who ran away to a cave and discovered a family, became a legend in the region. People would tell the story of how a 10-year-old child, driven solely by love and the need for peace, managed to bring 3 generations together and save everyone's inheritance. But for Tommy, the best part of the story wasn't becoming a legend. It was being able to sleep every night, knowing he would wake up in a house full of love, in a united family, in a life where problems were solved through conversation, not shouting. And when the nights got too hot, he still liked to sleep in the cave, gazing at the stars through the opening in the rock, remembering the day his desperate escape turned into the best discovery of his life. The cave remained there, in the rock formations of the Arizona backcountry, a silent witness to how love can overcome pride, how family can overcome any adversity, and how sometimes the biggest changes in life start with a small act of courage. Years later, when Tommy became an adult, he would take his own children to that cave to tell the story of how a lost family found each other again. And they would learn that no matter how lost you feel, no matter how impossible the situation seems, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel for those who have the courage to look for it. The story of Tommy Henderson became more than a local legend. It became a reminder that family is the most precious treasure there is, and it's worth fighting for, even when it seems impossible, even when pride insists on pulling us apart. And the cave is still there, waiting for the next lost traveler who needs to discover they are not alone in the world, that there is always someone willing to help, that there is always a family waiting to welcome those in need of love. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Anthony made the right decision by accepting the family's help? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.